This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
And from the border of liberty and prosperity in the highway to the north, this is Safety Wars. Sorry about the late start here. I didn't realize that we were on the air. Lost track of time. How was your weekend? Everybody out there. We had one hell of a weekend here. I was doing a safety audit at a client facility, and what do you think we saw? What do you think we saw next to the lockout tagout station? You're gonna love this one. A set of bolt cutters, like a lock cutter, old-fashioned set of bolt cutters. I said, I'm not a lockout tagout expert by any means, but I don't think that's supposed to be there. Yeah, the things you see on a safety audit. I had to document that one. As I always say, right, if someone calls you, and I had a conversation with one of I was doing safety audits today. I had a conversation with one of the workers. He said, "Are you one of those there safety experts?" I said, No. First and foremost, if anyone calls themselves and self-identifies as a safety expert, be very afraid. I said, you can know a lot about one area. Like confined space entry. You can know a lot about hazardous waste site issues, fall protection issues. So you're not going to know all fall protection issues. So the expert at what you are doing, right, for your job and how to work safely is the person in the field. They're the ones that we should be relying on, not the quote-unquote safety expert, right? Oh, I'm the safety. I'm like, yeah, first and foremost, if you have to self-identify as an expert, you're probably not. So how do we approach this? Ask the right questions. Involve the worker. Talk things out. You often get more, you get better results if you talk to people. No, I'm not saying interrupt their work, but if you friendly, talk to people. I learned this from my father. We had been on, my brother Wally is a proud Navy vet. I'm not saying interrupt their work, but let me throw that down. I turn on the iPad to make sure I'm on the air. My brother Wally is a Navy vet, served in the early 1980s, and if you go into like if a ship's in port, so we have Fleet Week, for example, in New York every year, and then you have Fleet Week on the West Coast, and they bring in, usually it's for the 4th of July or Memorial Day, somewhere around that time of year, and the Navy brings in all their ships, and you get tours of the ships, of certain ships, not all of them, just certain ships. And if you are a Navy veteran, you get to go on the ship ahead of everybody else. So the USS Intrepid, the last time I was on it, if you were a Navy vet, or any vet for that matter, you got to go first on line. So it was, I believe, the USS America, and the USS America has been scrapped for a long time, so you know how old this story is. And we go on, it's an aircraft carrier, and we go on it, and with my father and brother, we were on vacation. I was in high school, and we start going through the whole thing, and my they have a tour guide, and the tour guide is doing the thing, doing what they're supposed to. I guess I don't know what rank the person was, but they were specially trained to be a tour guide for this ship. And they have the guy all the way in the background that's doing the, picking up the slow people, right? People who are lagging behind and trying to know if there's a problem, right? So my father goes up to him, and I want to hear, what the tour guide is saying and everything else. I thought I was considering a career in the military. Anyway, my father starts talking to the guy all the way in the back, and he strikes up a conversation with him, and it turns out that the guy is a machinist, mate, I believe that's what his specialty is. And my father says, you know what? I'm a tool and die maker, retired. He says, I would really love to see your machine shop. You got a machine shop here? The guy says, yeah, we got it. He said, wait till the end of the tour. I'll take you to the machine shop. And we got to see the whole guts of the ship here going through it. And we got to see this and that. And what's the point? We got to talk to the right person, ask the right questions. And he showed us a whole bunch of stuff. No, the machine, and my father got the biggest kick in the world out of it. And this was the expert on the ship, right? The tour guide will tell you so much, but this guy really showed you really in-depth and detailed things. We stayed for like another hour. It was a wonderful experience. And that's the same thing in the workforce, right? You don't go in there, oh, I'm the expert, and oh, blah, 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 and you're doing this wrong, and you're doing this wrong, Go in there and ask a question. So, for example, hey, what exactly is going on here with the lockout tagout? What are those bolt cutters for? And you approach it like that. Well, along those lines, and then, then you can maybe work into, well, what kind of training have you had? Or were there any training? Did they do this? And you talk to the worker. Because this is what happens. I could go, and it's happened numerous times, where you give, someone goes for training, name the topic, doesn't matter what it is. And they, you have education, you have training, right? On the pyramid, you have education, training, then you have some type of a practical demonstration, right? And then you have integration of that training into the actual work that you're doing. You can see it took effect. The education and training and practice and everything else goes right into everyday work, practice, what they're doing. So you can have 1,000,001 training classes, but if it doesn't ever get applied, it's not really good. OSHA also, when they poll the employees, so they come to the job site, your facility, what have you, and you go in and they say, one of the questions is, well, they're going to take the worker aside, and the worker is going to say, and they're going to ask questions. Well, how come you guys are wearing respirators, right? Well, did you go for a physical for that? How often do you wear a respirator? It's going to probably be one of the first. Oh, did you go for a physical? Maybe did they give you like a medical evaluation with that? Did they give you training? And then they go into, there was a well-known company that went through this. They said, well, why are you wearing a respirator? What's that protecting you from? Cost them about $45,000. And plus the guy, they were wearing the respirator legitimately. They had a legitimate need for it. However, the 5 or 6 employees that they spoke to had no clue why they were wearing respirators. None. And then the other thing was that none of the respirators were in containers or bags when not in use or hanging up after deconning. They would just leave them. Hey, no, they're driving a forklift. They leave the respirator in the forklift. They're in the room with bulk storage with drums, or they're emptying drums into smaller containers. They leave the respirators right there hanging right out on the drum. Well, they got whacked for that per respirator on that. It was just a bad situation. So what's the point? The expert on what goes on in the workplace is not always the supervisor. It's usually the worker on that. And a good compliance officer or a good auditor from OSHA is going to pick up on whether they're being lied to or not by the worker, and will ask the right questions and everything else to get down to the bottom of things. I have had workers try to sabotage me. where I had it was a fall protection accident. We were interviewed by OSHA, and they said, Mr. Posel, you gave training on fall protection. Yes, sir. Well, what proof do you have that you gave training? Well, here's the sign-in sheet. Do you have any other proof, Mr. Posel? Yes, here is the copy of the exams associated with it. Well, Mr. Posel, we saw that the workers on this site, on this state, were not wearing fall protection regularly, the way it was supposed to be. Well, do you have a list of those employees? Yeah, we had Mr. Smith, Mr. Jones, Mr. this. They're all Polish names. Not going to get into it. And he says to me, I said, okay, I have 17 pages of pictures here that are included in the training pamphlet, but the manual. I have everybody that goes to that training class sign the sign-in sheet, sign the picture, showing them how to use it, fall protection distance, how do you put on the respirator and everything else. Plus, we have pictures of the training class of them doing that. Maybe not that worker in particular, but we could show that we did. They said, okay, Mr. Posel, thank you very much. But you realize you have a problem with your workers because your workers said that they received no training, but we could see right here the documentation is that they did receive training and they were lying to us. And that's an issue. You can't really lie to a federal employee doing an investigation, but the whole thing went our way, by the way. The audit and everything, my client was cited for something, but it had nothing to do with fall protection. By the way, I wasn't even on the job. This is a mobile crew. So that's how that goes. Had they wanted to get us on fall protection and we didn't have those documents, that would have been a problem. So that's what you want to do. So we're going to go into a little bit of news and views, and then we're going to talk about nuclear issues. All right, so this keeps on coming up, and I don't want this to become the nuclear show. So we're going to go in deep with this today, nuclear issues and radiological issues. And then I'm not going to mention it the rest of the week unless something happens. I'm going to be referencing this program. This is Monday, January 30th, 2023 of Safety Wars on safetyfm.com. And I'm just going to reference back to this. And this is probably what we're going to do with every one of these big topics going forward. So we're going to take a brief break, and then we're going to go into do a little bit of a deep dive on this. So let's go to break.
In the professional safety community, communication and planning are just a few keys to your program's success. The question many practitioners have is, where do I start? Dr. Jay Allen, the creator of the Safety FM platform and host of the Rated R Safety Show, has built a global foundation to help you along the way. Go to safetyfm.com and listen to some of the industry's best and most involved professionals, including Blaine Hoffman with the Safety Pro, Sam Goodman with the Hop Nerd, Sheldon Primus with the Safety Consultant, Jim Pozell with Safety Wars, Emily Elrod with Unapologetically Bold, and many others. As individuals, we can do great things, but as a team, we become amazing. Dial into safetyfm.com today and surround yourself with a powerful force of knowledge and support.
Okay, so we're back. We're going to go into...
You are listening to Safety Wars. Tomorrow's Safety Today.
We're going to go into some financial news here. And I forgot to pull up the web page. Okay, here we go. Dow Jones Industrial fell slightly today by 0.77%, closing at 33,717. S&P 500 at 4017.77. NASDAQ at 11,393.81. Russell 2000 at 1885.72, down. U.S. Treasury notes are up to 3.536%. Bitcoin is up slightly at 22,823. Crude oil is up slightly today, but it's lower than last week at 77.96. And we're going to go on to precious metals. Precious metals. We have gold down slightly today at 1933.60. Silver down slightly at 23.87. Platinum down slightly at 1,028.30. And palladium is holding steady at 1671. Let's go into OSHA news, right? So this is all of these stories are open source right out of the OSHA website and the press releases. This is out of Hartford, Connecticut. A federal investigation has found a Manchester's contract. By the way, everyone is innocent until proven guilty. These proposed citations are often vacated or negotiated downward or litigated. So this is just the initial stuff and proposed violations. And a federal investigation has found a Manchester contractor's failure to provide legally required safeguards and make sure that they were in place to prevent a trench collapse contributed to the July 22nd, 2022 death of an employee buried when an 8-foot deep trench caved in. Investigators from OSHA determined a contractor exposed their worker to deadly hazards as he connected drainage piping at a residential development construction site in Vernon. Previously, in November 2015, OSHA inspectors identified 4 serious violations related to trench work by a company at a Stafford work site. Sounds like this was right down the street from where I was working a couple of years ago. The deadly cave-in and workers' death should never have happened, according to the OSHA area director Dale Varney. After a previous OSHA inspection, the company knew of the dangers of working in an unprotected trench, the need to inspect the trench and ensure required effective cave-in protection was in place. Right, big run-on sentence there, Dale. Before any employee entered the trench. The company, however, still chose to ignore these required safeguards, and now a worker's family, friends, blah, 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 and coworkers are left to grieve. Right? Family, let me repeat that. Workers, family, friends, and coworkers never say blah, blah. But we always say blah, blah, and are thinking, well, oh, yeah, everybody. Guess what? This really impacted people to watch someone die. You ever had to watch someone die unexpectedly? It impacts you. And this is, right, specifically, OSHA found that Botticello failed to provide the trench with a protective system to prevent it from collapsing and caving in on workers. Having a competent person, remember what a competent person is. You have to conduct inspections before, during the work and identify and correct hazardous conditions. If you can't identify the conditions, you can't correct them, you're not a competent person. Ensure the 135-foot trench contains sufficient means of egress to allow workers to safely exit. That means it's got to be within 25 foot of each worker, a way to get out, right? Or a ramp, something. Right? But that has to be determined by the competent person. As a result of the violations and the employer's prior knowledge, OSHA cited the company for 3 willful violations and proposed $375,000 and change in penalties. And no, we won't go through that today because I want to get to the other one. And we already talked about that story on Friday. This was from today from the EPA. Today, the U.S. EPA and Department of Justice announced a settlement with Logan Square Aluminum Supply, resolving alleged violations of the federal lead renovation, repair, and painting regulations, known as the RRP rule, on renovation projects Logan Square and its contractors performed in Chicago and Chicago suburbs. What does it end up, right? They didn't have a plan. They didn't have people certified and lead, which is the RPP rule, and they will pay a $400,000 penalty and perform $2 million of lead-based paint abatement work in lower-income properties, right? With that, blah, 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 and going on and on. Lead exposure from lead-based paint continues to be a hazard for American families living in older homes. Basically, anything from 1978 or before has lead paint in it, almost guaranteed. But let's remember, when this thing kicked in, a lot of people went out and bought lead-based paint. So 1978, it says, oh yeah, that's the cutoff point for residential interior lead in that thing. But people were still using lead-based paint up until like the mid to late 1980s. Some sources say up to I used to be a lead inspector risk assessor licensed state of New Jersey, and they went into this because what people were using, they were bringing industrial, especially in the lower income neighborhoods. People would find paint or would buy paint or would steal paint often, or a company will let them take paint home, like Bridge Paint, and go and paint houses, which is why you probably need a lead inspection anyway done, or presume that everything is lead. Rhode Island senator proposes a $20 minimum wage. As Rhode Island's 2023 legislative session gets underway, the head of the Senate's Committee on Labor has introduced a bill proposing a $20 minimum wage by 2025. State Senator Frank Saccone of Providence, Democrat, is the sponsor of Senate Bill 0037. The bill, as drafted, proposes increasing Rhode Island's minimum wage from the current rate of $13 an hour to $15 an hour on this coming January 1st, and to the benchmark of $20 an hour the following January 1st. So that's all being in there. Now, this is not the first time that this has happened there, and the critics are saying that the people pro are saying, hey, it's going to be good to get people paid a living wage. The critics are saying that often people lose their jobs there's a loss of employment. I don't know. Got to figure it out. A celebrity bow hunting couple has been sentenced in Omaha federal court on charges of violating wildlife poaching laws. Josh Bomar and Sarah Bomar were each sentenced to 3 years probation and 40 hours of community service in the largest known poaching case in Nebraska, according to the New York Post. They were guilty of violating a Lacey Act, which bans trafficking in fish, wildlife, or plants that are illegally taken, possessed, transported, or sold. The couple was among dozens of others who were charged with unlawfully taking big game animals and with Hidden Hills Outfitters, a commercial big game guiding and outfitting business near Broken Arrow between 2015 and 2017. And, this is how they got them. They posted footage. And these are federal charges here. With this. So, I don't know. It's, don't illegally hunt. Wyoming denounces electric vehicles to support oil and gas. I think we covered this early last week. Wyoming lawmakers have introduced a resolution that denounces electric vehicles and pledges support for the oil and gas industry. Senate Joint Resolution 004 stresses support for phasing out the sale of new electric vehicles. However, people could still buy them, right? Right, and no, this all would take effect in 2035. And I think this is, in retaliation for California here. Okay, so we're going to talk about, one more. President Joe Biden informed Congress on Monday that he will end the twin national emergencies addressing COVID-19 on May 11th, as most of the world has returned closer to normalcy, nearly 3 years after they were first declared. In a move to end the national emergency and public health emergency declarations, would formally restructure the federal coronavirus response to treat the virus as an endemic threat to public health that can be managed through agencies and normal authorities. So basically, we were going back to normal on May 11th. No, and you know what? Right before the primary elections in a couple of states, I find that very curious. Okay, so now we're going to talk about nuclear stuff. I'm going to read the stories here. All right. I'm going to read to highlight the threat and the issues that were going on are all from mainstream media, right? As mainstream gets. This is from the Associated Press. Korea leaders avoid specific measures to address the nuclear crisis. This is from Goyang. Goyang? Yeah, I'm assuming it's Goyang, South Korea. Associated Press. The leaders of North and South Korea played it safe Friday, repeating a previous vow to rid the Korean peninsula of nuclear weapons, but failing to provide any specific measures to forge a potential breakthrough on an issue that has captivated and terrified many since rivals seemed on the verge of war last year. Number 2. This is an analysis from AP, January 26, 2023, John Gambrell. Iran has enough highly enriched uranium to build several nuclear weapons if it chooses, the United Nations top nuclear official is now warning, but diplomatic efforts aimed again at limiting its atomic program seem more unlikely than ever before as Tehran arms Russia in its war on Ukraine as unrest shakes the Islamic Republic. The warning from Rafael Mariano, Grossi of the International Atomic Energy Agency in response to questions from European lawmakers this week shows just how high the stakes have become. And for months, non-proliferation experts have suggested Iran had enough uranium enriched up to 60% to build at least one nuclear weapon, though Tehran has long insisted its program for peaceful purposes. Okay. Ukraine, this is from beginning of last week, AP. Ukraine war moves doomsday clock to 90 seconds to midnight. So we covered that where the atomic, from the advocacy group, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, right, founding members, Albert Einstein and Oppenheimer, from what I remember, the advocacy group started in 1947 to use the clock to symbolize the potential likelihood of people doing something to end humanity. Now we're in like 90 seconds of midnight, which is nuclear war. Ukraine war to accelerate shift to clean energy, according to BP. Russia's war in Ukraine is expected, and this is from Reuters, to weigh on long-term energy demand and accelerate the world's shift to renewables and low-carbon power as companies boost domestic energy supplies. This also includes, not in here in the article, but I've read all over the place, includes nuclear stuff. Right? So, proliferation to nuclear, I got the hiccups. Proliferation to nuclear material. Remember that. This is from NPR.org, National Public Radio. Russia's nuclear arsenal is huge, but will Putin use it? This is from October 17th of last year. For decades, the threat of nuclear Armageddon has kept Russia and the West out of a direct confrontation. As an aside, that is called MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction. The prospect of global nuclear war has been a line that neither side is willing. But now, analysts who study Russia's nuclear strategy say they are increasingly worried that this stark nuclear line is becoming blurred. As Russia's conventional war in Ukraine falters, thanks in large part to Western weapons and training, some see an effort to bend nuclear deterrence to fit the current conflict. Now, I have read, and I don't have the source here, but I have read several times from military sources that nuclear weapons, small nuclear weapons, are on the table here in the Ukraine war if Russia starts losing. And Putin has reportedly said that. This is from Okay. And nobody wants to say what those medications are. So, World Health Organization released an updated report on Friday detailing medications that governments should have on hand in the event of radiological or nuclear emergency. Governments should have a national stockpile of PPE. Yeah, well, I think we learned that from the COVID thing. But also a range of pharmaceuticals, including potassium iodide tablets, antiemetics, nausea, right, from what I recall, anti-diarrhea agents, decorporating agents, alkylating agents, and other medications. Okay, we're going to see where this is. Hold on, everybody. World Health Organization, they keep on wanting you to download everything. Hold on. I have the list of the medications here. Let me get them. I had it right in front of me. Or bear with me, everybody. Hold on. This is actually worth a deep dive itself. Okay, this is what they are recommending. All right. I'm going to put this up on our social media. In addition to generic medical supplies, right? This is right from the WHO report here. It is National Stockpiles for Radiological and Nuclear Emergencies Policy Advice. In addition to the generic medical supplies such as trauma kits, fluids, painkillers, antibiotics, etc., radiation stockpile will include some specific elements, medicines, and devices. As specific products are required for a radiation emergency, it is important that product formulations make them amenable for rapid use and mass casualties. Thus, their route of administration should require minimal medical oversight. Oral, subcutaneous, transdermal, inhaled, or intramuscular rather than IV injection. Going on and on and on. Devices for assessing radiation dose and thereby for triggering large numbers of potentially exposed individuals may have limited use in mass casualties because the requirements that devices be minimally invasive, rapid, radiation specific. And it goes on and on and on. The elements of a stockpile formulary are subject to national pharmaceutical regulation and approvals and regulatory status. Table 3, and I'm reading off of Table 3, provides a summary of key MCM, medical stuff, right? Medicines. So here they have potassium iodide. That's the classic one. Saves your thyroid. Prussian blue, which is the similar formulation to the dye used for clothing. All right, similar. Not the same exactly, but it's medical grade. Calcium or zinc DTPA. We'll go into more what that is. Alginates. What do alginates do? Alginate is a natural polymer of edible heteropolysaccharide abundantly available in brown seaweed. Now, when I wrote my book, Nuclear Terrorism, A Family Response Guide, this was basically, they were just started getting into brown seaweed. But now we see the WHO is recommending natural polymer, right? Alginate. How things change. We'll update our knowledge. Aluminum antacid, sodium bicarbonate, filgrastim. All right, let's look up what that is. Filgrastim. Again, all done in real time, guys. It's considered a biological medication, right? Filgrastim injection products include Granix, Neupogen, Nivistrim, blah, 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 and Nivistrim, Gluclo, and Zario are used to decrease the chance of infection in people who have non-myeloid cancer, meaning cancer that does not involve the bone marrow and are receiving chemotherapy medications that may decrease the number of neutrophils. Okay, that's from medlineplus.gov, U.S. government website. Again, not from conspiracy theory websites. This is all from mainstream websites here, guys. I got a comment last week. You're doing this. Yeah, well, guess what? The other one is, here we go. Granulocyte macrophage colonies, blah, blah, blah. It is Sagramestrum and Malagravstum. It's, boom, boom, boom. And they give it to bone marrow patients. All right. Here. Bone marrow and chemotherapy patients, right? For high levels. And the last one that they recommend is Ramiplostim. You can look this all up yourself. Ramiplostim is a fusion protein analog of someone else that regulates blood platelets and platelet production. Okay, great. So these are the drugs that they recommend you have. If I ever do an update, I'll go into this. So that's potassium iodide, Prussian blue, calcium or zinc, DTPA, alginates, aluminum antacids, sodium bicarbonate, filgrastim, sagramestim, and rhamnoplastim. Okay, so now that we've established that this is no longer conspiracy theory, and by the way, if we go over, I'm just going to keep going over and over and over, and you can catch it on the podcast tomorrow. So I wrote this book because I went to a conference on nuclear terrorism in the mid-2000s, and I realized that the people who had doing all the talking were not the experts, and the experts that were out there weren't doing all the talking, except for Crescent Carney and a couple of others that came out with nuclear war survival skills, which is still the official U.S. government in-depth book written in like the 80s or 70s on nuclear issues. Now, the advantage that we have here with nuclear issues and how they impact human health and everything else is that we had a thing called the Cold War that ended, depending on who you talk to, between 1989 and 1991. And it started just after the end of World War II, 1947, I believe. But anyway, we had a Cold War, and they dumped trillions of dollars into researching this stuff. And the advantage so I'm often asked, Jim, would you rather deal with a radiation cleanup, a biological cleanup, or a chemical cleanup? And I always answer that, well, and there is no wrong answer on here. And I always say radiation cleanup because they understand that the most, or at least in my opinion. All right? And then chemical cleanup, and then biological is the worst thing I ever want to deal with, and we've been dealing with that now going on 3 years. So, basically, I wrote this in 2012. I finalized it, but it was written well before that. There are deep divisions in this country among the vocal leaders of both the left and the right, but both agree nuclear terrorism is a real threat. And in this case, we're talking about nuclear war. On the left, there is Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who gave a major policy speech to the Council on Foreign Relations. This is right off of the Council on Foreign Relations website, by the way, not a conspiracy theory here. Iran poses a significant threat to the United States by combining access to nuclear materials and technology with support for terrorists whose aim is to attack and kill Americans. This was October 31st, 2006. We're still talking about that in the news today. On the right, there's a Newt Gingrich, right? That have been raising concerns about the threat of nuclear terrorism as far as back as 1999. Mr. Gingrich stated that the Hart-Rudman Commission of the Council on Foreign Relations recommended that the government be able to respond to 3 nuclear events in 3 different cities on the same morning. Some also believe that a nuclear event will be a false flag event used to usher in a totalitarian state. Those are my words, the last statement. So we have 2 people. One was Speaker of the House. The other one was Secretary of State that mentioned this. And again, this is a bipartisan thing going back and forth. And, then you get the other people that are out there, and it doesn't mean whether you're on the right or the left on this one, the extremists that believe that the United States deserves a nuclear event. Right? And what the Americans have seen as far as global nuclear war has been mostly from disaster movies, TV shows. Jericho is one of them from the mid 2000s. The Day After Tomorrow, which was in I believe it was 83 or 84. The same guy that Nicholas Meyer, who directed Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, directed that movie, The Day After Tomorrow, with an all-star cast on that. And we've been and that's where people have this. Right, and then it goes back to the ridiculous one where you had the Attack of the Killer Tomatoes and Godzilla and all the other stuff in there. So a lot of people feel that this is a joke. This ain't no joke. This is game on, especially now when we have arguably World War III, as people have called it, in Ukraine. But now, today, the cooler heads are preparing a little bit. We didn't go into those on this. So the government, and I went through FEMA training for the CERT, and all the other research I have is, and the FEMA, right, and everybody that they're preparing for a 10 kiloton device. What is a 10 kiloton device? So, for comparison, the bomb dropped in Hiroshima, Japan was calculated to have been around roughly 15 to 17 kilotons of TNT, while the one in Nagasaki, Japan was 21 kiloton. So what would be a 10 kiloton weapon, right? This is from an article a number of years ago from USA Today. Again, not a conspiracy website here, not a conspiracy theorist by any means. For nuclear weapons, fuel for nuclear weapons is more widely available by Peter Eisler. The International Atomic Energy Agency says it takes 17.6 pounds of plutonium or 55.1 pounds of highly enriched uranium, that's uranium-239, amounts that could fit into a suitcase to build a nuclear weapon. More experienced and well-funded terrorists can make a bomb with much less than this. This definitely would fit the description of a suitcase nuke. All right, so again, what we were worried about in the early 2010s was stuff from the old Soviet Union that's going around, but now we're worried about that got lost or sold or anything else. But now we have, we have countries that have historically not been so nice towards the United States or to their neighbors, like Pakistan having nuclear weapons, India reportedly having nuclear weapons, North and South Korea, right? Nuclear weapons. I don't know about South Korea so much. They rely on the United States, but nuclear weapons over there, according to today's news. This stuff is not going away with this stuff. We're not even going to talk about EMPs. That's the story for another day, which would fry most of the electrical grid in the United States. Now, what is what are we worried about? When you have a nuclear explosion, you have 3 basic things. You have heat, and you have light, and you have heat, light, and a blast, right? Is what you're dealing with. So what would a blast be? That would be an overpressurization of the like a shock wave. So if you take a rock and you throw it in a pond or a puddle of water and you see the waves going across, that's a shock wave. And it would be roughly, they're saying, like at the source, you're talking about, from what I recall, 8 to 10 PSI overpressure, sort of like close to like a arc flash, right? Some arc flash is a lot lower. That is what normally kills people, is that blast. Then heat, obviously, you get a lot of heat vaporizing people, right? Vaporizing things, right? And then radiation being released because that uranium 235 and plutonium degrade, right? Are able to change into other forms of more stable elements. So you have three basic traditional types of radiation particles that are out there. You have alpha, you have beta, and you have gamma radiation. So what's an alpha? Alpha, and just think about this. An alpha particle is actually a helium atom that is doubly ionized. It's 2 electrons and 2 protons, and it's big compared to beta particles. So beta particles are released from the nucleus of an atom, and is a lot smaller. It's a lot smaller. Now, like alpha particles, once beta particles enter the body, they can cause significant internal organ damage. So alpha particles are stopped by a thin layer of light material, sheet of paper, that sort of thing, and outer dead layer of skin. Beta particles, because they move a lot faster than the alpha particles and are smaller, are able to go and penetrate the skin a lot more. And then you have gamma radiation, and believe me, you're not going to turn into the Incredible Hulk, but it's pure energy, right? And it it's high energy electromagnetic radiation emitted by certain radionuclides with a nuclide transition from a higher to a lower energy state. The rays have a high energy and a short wavelength, and basically the only thing you can do with that is large amounts of shielding, increasing your distance from the source, and limiting your time, your basic time, distance, and shielding strategy. Now, what happens with fallout? Now, you think of, and if you didn't witness this like I did, think of a 9/11 with the Twin Towers collapsing and the other buildings there. You had a huge dust cloud. Now imagine this. Huge dust cloud everywhere, just over miles and miles and miles, and then you go downwind. So a terrorist most likely would release and detonate a nuclear weapon at the ground. A nuclear weapon from a superpower, right, where you're dealing with fusion bombs and everything else, big things that are out there, right? They're done from the air. It's an air burst. So this nuclear fallout puts dust, debris, and radioactive materials tens of thousands of feet in the air, and eventually falls to Earth. Now, the radioactive material in that material you inhale, and it goes into your body and gets incorporated into your body because they're metals and other things. It stays in your body. Your body, if it filters it out at all, takes a long time. Now it's emitting alpha, beta, gamma radiation, basic radiation. There are others with this, right? This is a real simplified view of this inside your body, impacting your soft tissues, and that's when you get possible some type of radiation poisoning. Right, the most severe being acute radiation symptoms. Acute radiation syndrome, ARS. ARS is caused by exposure to high levels of radiation over a short period of time over a large section of the body and reaches the internal organs. So, what are the immediate effects from a nuclear explosion? Virtually all people will die within what is called the heavy damage radius. The light damage area outward poses better chances of survival, but victims will probably all have skin burns and later develop ARS. What are the symptoms? Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Those are the first ones. These symptoms start within minutes or days of exposure and may be intermittent. Extreme flu-like symptoms, seizures, and coma accompany virtually all ARS illnesses and may last up to several months if you survive that. Skin damage, obviously, and mortality. Obviously, the higher rate of exposure, the less likely chances of surviving. The causes of death in most cases is the destruction of bone marrow. Right, for survivors, recovery may take up to 2 years. Going onward. So, I'm going to read this out here, and I'm going to do it in rads, right, as the thing. So 0 to 100 rads of radiation, virtually no effect. All right? And this is all from the Department of Defense has had a publication, Acute Radiation Syndrome. All right? Is basically what it is. So 0 to 1 rads, there's virtually no effect. 100 to 200 rads, nausea and vomiting for 10 to 50% of the victims ceases within 24 hours. And then you have other clinical issues there, and there's a minimal mortality risk. And somewhere around 5% or less of the individuals are hospitalized for 45 to 60 days. Now, 200 to 600 rads, it's also called the sublethal range. Nausea and vomiting in 50 to 100% of the victims begins within 2 to 4 hours, lasts 24 hours. Cognitive impairment, other clinical signs, you can go look this up, right? The time of onset is 2 days to 2 weeks, and 90% hospitalization for up to 90 days, and low mortality risk with aggressive therapy. That is the medicines that we were all talking about here, right? Then 600 to 800 rads, nausea and vomiting, in 75 to 100% of victims. You know, you're going closer and closer and closer into the ground zero, right? And then 800 to 300,000 plus rads. This is right at ground zero practically. What doesn't kill you, this is what it does. Over 90% of victims experience nausea and vomiting within minutes or less than 1 hour, and it's basically death within 48 hours, over 3,000 rads, and 2 to 14 days, right? So that's the lethal range. So, and then we have the different things, right? For leukemia, right, 2 to 40 years is basically you have, that's where it's going to show up. Bone cancer within 15 years, thyroid cancer 15 to 30 years, lung cancer 10 to 20 years, life-shortening stuff, right? That's, the data was not there for that, other than, anecdotally, your life is going to be shortened. Contradicting data, and cataract formation within 1 to 5 years. So what do you do with this? All right. Again, like with everything else, the current thing is stay inside, in a room or a basement surrounded by dirt, right? So if you're in a basement surrounded by dirt on multiple sides or substantial things, we used to have things called fallout shelters indoors. Again, like with all of our other disaster preparation stuff, it's everything. It's the same stuff, except you're going to probably have to hunker down if you're at home for a week or more, right? For with a nuclear blast, if you survive it. Again, you're, well, Jim, I don't want to go and I don't want to survive anything. I don't want to live in a world like that. You're not the situation that you're in is not dependent on you. You're not in control of it. You may have, get this, and by the way, if you have a family, you're going to want to survive and prepare for your family, what they're going to be going through. It's not all about you. Not all about you. It's about society. It's about everything else that goes into all your disaster preparation. We've gone through it from time immemorial on this show and outside the show. You can go and look back at our old programs here, right? Now, I'm going to, my book had all different things. Maybe I'll reissue it, updated, that sort of thing. But everything that I quoted out of here was open source information here. So we're going to face the facts here, and I've read this before on the air. I'm going to read it again. It is likely that the contents of this book, and then I read from a lot from this book today, my book, will cause mixed feelings ranging from denial and disillusionment to hopefully empowerment. I hope that I have inspired empowerment not only in disaster management, but in all aspects of your own life. The past few years have been rough on our nation. This is 2012. Look at what we've been through since. We have faced economic problems, disillusionment with the political situation, politicians and political parties, the rise of radical groups, and other challenges. This is 2012 I wrote this. Insights that were once called conspiracy theories have now been called conspiracy facts. Unfortunately, our government has proven that they are unwilling or unable to protect the public without curtailing civil rights and running up massive debt. And I'm going to say this, agency. Your decisions, right? This is 2012. That's what happened, how we managed COVID here. That's not the opinion of the people on this radio station. That's Jim Polzel's opinion. Going on and on. There are many in our government that take advantage of this situation. I'm not going to mention names here. Faced with the threat of a nuclear disaster, do you really want to risk your future on elected and appointed leaders who allow bad situations to fester? Are they to blame, or are we to blame for electing them and not keeping after them and keeping them in check? Right? This is not a political program, but I'm going to throw that in there. The power lies with us. That means you, the listener here. And that means we can fix it through the power of many things. The ballot box, redressing our grievances with the government, public meetings, you name it, we could do it. It's us. We got to be empowered and take the opportunity to use it. We have the opportunity in our society to change course. Work through your local communities. Work with your local politicians. If they won't work with you, form your own stuff. Form your own community. Look at your organization that you're involved in. Your workplaces, community groups, churches, synagogues, mosques, all of those things are all available. Scouting. No, check back with us. We have good information. And by the way, we do disaster response worker training where we do up to 15 hours of training on this, and it's all government authorized. We're authorized by OSHA to do that here at Safety Wars. So, and we give 40-hour HAZWOPER courses. We're planning on doing an 8-hour refresher online. We're going to be advertising that and everything else. So this is what I want you to do. Go and prepare. Be empowered. We can make it through this, regardless of what we have. For Safety Wars, this is Jim Polzel.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and its guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the company. Examples of analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based only on very limited and dated open source information. Assumptions made within this analysis are not reflective of the position of the company. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast, Jay Allen.